Hello, I'm George Potter. Welcome to Gospel Tangents.
At the end of the Frankincense Trail, Nephi built a ship. But where did he build this ship? George Potter makes the case for a harbor called Khor Rori. Ancient shipbuilders from the time of Nephi actually built ships there. We'll talk about that location as well as possible other harbors in the area. Check out our conversation. I'd also like to remind everyone, please support Gospel Tangents. If you'll subscribe for just $10 a month, I will give you a transcript of this as well as all future transcripts as soon as they're done. Now back to our conversation.
You have to ask yourself, why did the Lord have Lehi cross the wilderness? It certainly didn't shape up Laman and Lemuel. They didn't shape up at all. They never did. They were worse when they got to the New World than they were in the Old World. Again, trying to kill Nephi. It didn't shape them up. Okay, what was the purpose of having them cross Arabia? Well, you got to go back to the fact that Nephi was given a promise while he was living in the valley of Lemuel that he would be given a promised land that would be across the many waters. He knew that they'd be crossing the oceans, at least two oceans, many waters, at least two oceans, to get to the promised land. It was not somewhere, down the road a ways. He had to build a ship to cross many waters. It had to be an incredible ship. Why did the Lord send them to Oman? Now just think. Oman was at that time probably were building the most sophisticated ships and were certainly the most sophisticated sea captains and shipwrights in the world at that time were in Oman because they were supporting the frankincense trade and the shipping from it. These are wealthy merchants. They had great fleets to sell their frankincense. So if you went to bed tonight and you had a dream, the Lord appeared to you and said, "Brother, you need to take your immediate family, your brother's families, and some other in-laws, and I want you to take them to the moon. You're going to build a spaceship, and you're going to take them to the moon. And here's what it's going to look like, and here's kind of a blueprint of what I want you to do." I'll bet you in the morning you'd wake up and you'd call NASA and say, "Can I come and visit you?" You know what I mean? You need technology. You need support. The Lord doesn't just hand you a ship. You got to build it, and you got to learn how to build it. You need to know all of the different skills and crafts are required to build a ship, a huge ship. So obviously, when they're in the valley, and they knew where the Frankincense Trail went, and they knew about the ships, I think when they left the valley, they knew exactly where they were going. The Leahona just had to keep them from not missing the wells in the desert, had to keep them from not getting lost. But they knew they had to go to Oman to get that technology, the resources they needed to build the ship to get them to the promised land. So why would they have gone to Oman? Why would they have followed the trail all the way to its end at the harbor of Khor Rori? Well, to build an ancient sailing ship, you need to have resources. You have to have the place to build the ship. You have to have the materials to build the ship. You have to have the skills and the crafts to build the ship. You need to know how to sail a ship. All these things you need to have and able to save your family to actually get, across many seas. So when you look at, I think they knew exactly where they were going. They get to the frankincense harbor of Khor Rori. What do you find there? You find there that you have a safe harbor where you can build ships. So in my book, Voyages of the Book of Mormon, we show you right there at the harbor at Khor Rori, where they had the ancient ways. Ways are ramps where you build the ship, then you lower your ship into the water roll it down on logs, using gravity to get your ship into the water. Why do you need to build it above the water, roll it down? The hull of a sailing ship, an ancient sailing ship made out of wood, probably would have weighed 100 tons. The size of a ship that Nephi needed. Oh, why did he need such a big ship? But you got to think about it for a while. There are probably between 50 and 70 people in the party. When you look at all the kids that are being born, other people that were involved in it, they took tents with them. Tents, not one tent. They had tents. A Bedouin tent, I measured it one time, just a 10 by 10 tent is 60 cubic feet. 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet by 6 feet. They're big, bulky things. They had to have anchors because they had to stop, anchor their ship to go in to get fresh water, to look for food wherever they came across an island. They needed to take the plates. They needed all the food and water they would need to get them there. They needed room to dance. You remember they were so successful that Nephi and Lemuel took over and they started dancing on the ship. Had to be room for that. Had to be a room for them to cook, room for them to sleep. All their provisions, weapons, plates. You think of all the things they needed to take with them. There had to be a big ship. So when I talk to people who are experts in this area, like the guys that wrote the book Voyages of the Book of Mormon with, Frank Linehan and Comrade Dixon, these guys know ships. They're talking about a ship that was probably 70 to 100 feet long. What do you need to build a ship 100 feet long? And it's a sailing ship, because Nephi said, once they got through the storm and then there was the lull, the dundrum, he sailed the ship. It's a sailing ship. Okay. So what do you need to build a ship like that? Well, first thing you need again is that resource, a place to build it. Above the in a protected area, protected from winds, from waves, from storms. The Indian Ocean has got monsoons that come in and cause huge waves. They're very destructive along the beach, so it had to be someplace that was very calm, water, still waters. You build the ship on it, then you lower it down in. It's above the water, so it's protected from high tide and from storm. So they had a place to build a ship. And then you need to have wood. And we're not talking about gnarly old trees that grow in Oman that are worthless for building a ship. You need long hardwoods, strong enough to make beams to support a ship against the pressures of the sea. I mean, beams have to be very strong. You have to have a keel, okay, that holds the ship together, that you build your ribs upon. It can't be a bunch of softwood or some gnarly old pieces of wood. It has to be a single piece of wood. So the marine archaeologist Tim Severance, when he was building a replica of Sinbad the sailor's ship to sail it from Oman to China, because Sinbad was from Oman. Remember, these are the great sailors of the time. Sinbad, he had to find one log that was 85 feet long to be the mainmast. Okay? The keel had to be a single piece of wood 70 feet long. And his ship only carried 20 people. Okay? You need hardwoods. What we know is that the Indians were selling teak wood that was already pre-cut at Khor Rori, at least back to 200 BC. And they were probably selling it, that wood. They have written records of Indians selling their wood back 2000 BC. We don't have particularly for Khor Rori, but we know they were trading in Khor Rori. So you need to find a source of wood. That wood does not grow in Oman. Some people have speculated, it does. Look how green the forests are in Oman. Forget it. There's not a marine archaeologist anywhere in the world that believes that. And we contacted archaeologists from Germany, from UCLA, from Australia, who are studying in Oman. They'll tell you right off the bat, no wood that was ever grew in Oman was made to build ships. It was all imported, and probably from India. Okay, so at Khor Rori, we know the Indians were coming in, trading teak wood for frankincense. All right. Another source that you need is cotton. This ship that Tim Severance built, it required 5 sets of sails. One sail alone was 3,000 square feet. One sail alone. Why do you need sails? Because you need to have wind. If you don't have wind, you cannot cross the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. You'll starve to death. The oceans are a desert. You've got to get quickly across them if you want to survive, especially in old sailing ships. So they had to go probably at least to the roaring 40s latitude to get enough wind to cross successfully either the Atlantic or the Pacific. So we believe the Pacific. But they had to get out of the Indian Ocean, then across the Pacific. You need sails. Tim Severn's sails, one ripped apart in a storm. His mainsail, by the time it got to India, a very short distance, had already stretched. He had to have 3 sets of sails just to get to China. Where did Nephi get the cotton to build or to fabricate his sails? If he had gone to his wife and said, honey, could you please make me 3 sets of sails? One needs to be 3,000 square feet. I don't have any cotton for you, any other fabric. Please do it. They'd still be there trying to make those sails. We know from written records that the Indians were selling cotton fabric there. We also know that cotton was growing at Khor Rori because they found the pollen from the cotton. So that was they're probably already manufacturing cotton fiber at there for the sails of the ships they were building there. Now curiously, Nephi says that he was building a ship different than the way other men were building ships. Well, how do you know how other men were building ships? He had to be in the shipyard, right? And we know that they were building ships at Khor Rori as far back as 1000 BC at that harbor to support the trade. Even up in the cliffs, you see the ships, the petroglyphs of the ships that they were making, different than any other ships that were being built anywhere around the Indian Ocean. So they were uniquely being built there at Khor Rori. And we have the ways that still exist where they lowered their ships in to this natural harbor. So we have the fact that they got there, they would have had a source of cotton, they would have had a source of wood. Interesting, Richard Willington, I don't know my partner how he found this, but he discovered where archaeologists have studied wood and how it was cut in the Mediterranean, how they cut logs, and how they cut logs in India. And they found out that the Indians knew how to carve or to cut the wood, the logs, in a way that made it stronger than they did in the Mediterranean. So if Nephi is being able to go and buy logs or planks or beams or whatever from India, he's noticing that they're cut differently than they would have been up in Palestine, the Mediterranean. So he says, it's interesting that we worked wood or timbers of interesting or curious workmanship. They were different. They didn't cut the wood this way. So it's an interesting little side there that I find very curious. So what else did Nephi need? He needed ore. He needed flint. So the Lord says, Nephi, go up to the mountain. Nephi goes to the mountain. You go build my ship, remember? Here's what it looks like. And what's Nephi asked for? He needs to have tools, unique tools. Now, we believe that those unique tools were nails. Okay?
Oh, really?
Nails, okay? Because at that time, they would use pegs to hold ships together, and they would tie ships together to drill holes and tie them together with coconut rope. That's how they built ships in Oman. That's how Tim Severn's built his ship. And when it got to China, it was taking in a foot of water. And they're using pumps, electric pumps, to keep the ship afloat. Those ships don't hold up very good. So we know the Chinese used pegs anciently, but we think that the Lord said you need to have nails, big spikes to hold this ship together. Because remember, the Lord says, I'll show you how to build a ship that will actually get your people there, that will get your people to the promised land. You build a ship like this, it's not going to work. You follow my instructions, it'll be strong enough, it'll hold together to get your people to the promised land. So it's very interesting wording that the Lord uses when he says, I will show you a ship that can get your people to the promised land. So Nephi goes up the mountain and says, I need to have a place for ore, okay, 5 miles from Khor Rori is where BYU metallurgists found iron ore. Okay, they could use enough iron ore there. There's only 2 places they found it in all of Oman that has iron ore. One of them's just 5 miles from Khor Rori, east of Khor Rori. You come another kilometer closer to Khor Rori, the ancient harbor, and what you have there is an ancient flint quarry where you can still get your flint, okay, but it's really a Iron Age flint quarry, okay. So you have your iron and your core right there below the mountain, okay. You go to Khor Rori itself, and you can still see the smelt areas where they smelted the iron. And very curious is how in the world did Nephi not only learn how to get these nails, we think, how did he learn to write on brass plates or golden plates?
I don't know.
It's a very interesting question. Well, I think it's in 1957, at least in the 1950s, an American archaeologist named Phillips was the first to actually dig in Khor Rori. And he found 7 brass plates with writing on them.
Really?
Yes. BYU knows about that. The Omani government knows about it. Phillips took those plates with him to the United States. He died. His sister has the plates. The Omani government is trying to sue to get them back. Very, very interesting. And there's a museum now in the area, Frankincense Museum. If you go there, you'll see a plate that was taken from the temple, okay, the ancient temple there at Khor Rori. It's a brass plate. And I'm not going to say a whole lot except for if you look at that brass plate and you look at the way the man's dressed and the way he's holding his hands, it reminds you very much what happens in LDS temples, okay? And it's a brass plate. It's in the museum there. If I had to learn, you just don't wake up one day and say, I know how to make a brass plate, because you have to be able to smelt the ore. You have to be able to use the hammering process to hammer that out. Very rare skill that you had to have, and then to engrave on the plates is also a skill you had to have. So by building that ship, being at Khor Rori, he could learn all these master skills and crafts that he would have needed to really transfer a civilization from the old world to the new world. So then the question is, again, of course, now he's got the resources to build a ship. How do you sail a ship?
Okay, before you go there, let me just back up just one second. I believe there's a couple of BYU guys who believe that there's a different harbor, not Khor Rori. I want to say Khor Kofut. Are you familiar with their theory?
Yeah. It's a waste of time. I didn't even go there. First of all, I've always kind of pondered, why did anybody even think that would be a place where they went? There's no trail into it. You can't get to it from the inland with camels. Okay? There's no harbor there. There's no resources there. Why would anybody even think of it as being a place where the Lord would have taken them? They couldn't have possibly. It's on a beach with waves crashing in. You try to launch a ship. First of all, how do you launch a ship without having ways to be able to do it? You're talking about, maybe the hull with just the hull itself, 100 tons. How do you get it out beyond the waves? It's called shipwreck. The whole thing is just preposterous. I'm sorry to say, it doesn't make any sense. If you just sit back and think about it, and why would the Lord have drug them there in the middle of nowhere? It just doesn't. Why did they cross the whole Arabia, get to a place that has no resources, no fruit, basically, that you'd call a place of land of fruit and honey? Because they'd already crossed through all the oases on the trail, where they had great oases of date palms and pomegranates and apricots. Then they get to a place where there's a few wild berries, probably made them sick. It just doesn't make any sense.
How far away is Khor Kofut from Khor Rori?
It's about 70 miles.
70 miles?
Yeah, another BYU professor wrote an article about another site, another Phillips, Wendell Phillips, and he basically just discounted Khor Kofut And he talked about, well, this area, if there wouldn't have been a sandbar there, they might have had a protected harbor. It could have been an area they could have built. Of course, they would have had to go to Khor Rori to get all the resources. So why would they have done that? Just go there. People still have the paradigm. I'm sorry, but people still have the paradigm that a prophet of God tries to go to the wilderness and hide himself. Okay, they don't mention anybody living there. Okay, so it must have been some isolated place. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. The prophet of God wants to be around people. We know from the Book of Doctrine and Covenants that they were teaching people as they're going through Arabia in the wilderness. They talk about being in the wilderness. Now they're in the land. They're no longer in the wilderness. There's lots of fruit. So it must have been a lot more fruit than they saw when they were coming down through the oasis of Arabia. It must have been really a very garden city, like Marco Polo called it, whatever. They talk about other people building ships. They're building it different than them. He certainly had to have people to help him construct the ship. His brothers wouldn't do it. Remember at the end it says, and when my brothers saw that the ship was done, they go, wow, you did a pretty good job, Nephi. Well, how's Nephi holding up those beams, and doing all that stuff? He had to have other shipwrights to help him. In fact, it's one thing to have a blueprint. It's an entirely different thing to build a ship. Okay, shipwrights back then, they learned it from their fathers, who learned it from their grandfathers, and so forth. A beam, okay, just the beam, not the beam of the ship. The planks that go along the side of the ship, again, they have to be long, they have to be steamed, they have to be bented, okay. They have to be within 1/64th of an inch in precision in order to seal when they swell. Because remember, you build the hole, you put the hole in the water in a safe harbor. This is how the ancients built their ships. The wood would then swell and seal. Okay, they put kind of a cloth in to kind of hold the water out, but then the water would seal, the things would swell. But it has to be within 1/64th of an inch. You think Nephi learned how to do that being the rich man's son up in Palestine? He had to have people show him how to do that. He had to have people help him. Now, you can pretend that, I woke up one day and there was a ship. But that's not the way the Lord ever dealt with me. I have to earn everything I have. He wants me to learn how to do things. He wants me to ask other people to help me to do things. I have to be resourceful. I have to use my skills, my ability to bond with other people, to create the resources I need to do what I need to do. So, you can have this fantasy that they went someplace in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden there were timbers, there were cotton, there were all these things that they needed, and shipwrights. There weren't. It doesn't make sense.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with George Potter. In our next conversation, we'll talk about Nephi's sailing trials. But George also has a very interesting theory as to how the wise men found Jesus. Is there a Book of Mormon connection?
And all the early Christian scholars believe the wise men came from southern Arabia. They were magi. At the time of Christ, the Iranians were controlling, the Persians were controlling southern Arabia. So they were using the word magi. 3 magi came from southern Arabia to worship the Christ child when he was born. How in the world did they ever know that the Christ child was born, the Savior of the world? To my knowledge, only one person knew when the Lord would be born, and that was Lehi, had gotten a vision that he'd be born 600 years from then. Okay, they came from Oman.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you like our page on facebook.com/gospeltangents. You can subscribe at youtube.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter @gospeltangents, as well as make sure that you subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our videos. Thanks again.